Nick Hudson, thank you so much for speaking with us here at the Aussie Wire. We're in the atrium, there's a lot of noise, we're competing with the background noise, so viewers, I apologise for that, but thank you for a moment of your time. Now, you're here at ARC. This is the launch of the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. Where have you come from, and why have you chosen to spend the time, the money, the effort to be here?
Well, by day I'm a private equity fund manager, and by night for the last 3 years or more I've run an organisation that was established to provide an alternative sense-making body in the context of the COVID policy response.
Okay.
So we came straight out of the gates in early 2020, making the observation that there was an emergent hysteria and that what was being said about the virus and the epidemic and so on was completely incompatible with the data.
Yeah. We picked a great moment for an interview. Yeah. Hold please. Normal programming will resume shortly.
I'll just let that finish. Yeah. There we go. And that organization grew very quickly and internationalized, and I was suddenly propelled into a kind of official spokesman, leadership kind of role that's taken me around the world, addressing in a very evidence-based fashion all the madness of the policy response that we saw. And I guess it's that prominence which led to me being invited here.
Yeah.
I have for years been saying that we need an alternative language even to get us out of this terrible trap of tribalism and polarization and the terrible trap of centralization. If there is a single enemy faced by humanity today, it is centralization. And I'm so pleased to hear, not once but a dozen times yesterday, people invoking the construct of subsidiarity. The idea that problems should be solved at the distal parts of hierarchies, that there is no need for centralization and taking a one-size-fits-all approach to all our problems. And that is a start of immense value. We also need to address other polarizing issues. For example, I've been arguing for a while now that the left-right dichotomy in politics is completely incoherent and needs to be abandoned.
Yeah, left-right dichotomy needs to be abandoned.
Yes, it's not been a coherent dichotomy since the French Revolution.
Right.
I've been arguing instead that we should consider our political spectrums or spectra in the sense of liberal versus authoritarian, and conservative versus revolutionary.
Right.
The liberal authoritarian spectrum makes a lot more sense than liberal conservatives. That's not actually a dichotomy.
Yeah.
A conservative is correctly framed as a person who believes that when addressing complex problems or complex systems, we should proceed with caution, that we shouldn't make widespread sweeping changes of an abrupt nature to complex systems, whether they be ecologies or the human body or society or our cultures and traditions. Whereas revolutionaries don't have that sensibility. They demand change now and on a large scale. That's a sensible dichotomy, conservative revolutionary. And liberal authoritarian is the real battle where we are today. And a hallmark of the authoritarian worldview is that it entails centralization, censorship, the one-size-fits-all approach, the top-down approach. And that's the real framing that we have to grapple with.
Sure.
And find a way to bring people from both sides of the old spectrum into a room together when they have a shared concern about the extent and danger of centralization.
I want to take a step back. You talked about the data analysis and the data that you were collecting on COVID and what you could show out of that data. I've no doubt, I'm absolutely certain that once you showed that data to world leaders and politicians, they looked at that and said, wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for your public service. We are now going to adjust our policies to align with what this data shows. Was that the response you had?
In a world where facts counted, that would have been the response, but it most decidedly was not. And even more disappointingly, I did encounter a few leaders and politicians who privately confided to me that they agreed, but said that the political position did not permit them to say that in public or even let alone to modify the response. And that tells you everything you need to know. It goes to the heart of the centralization problem that I'm talking about. On high, absolute clowns were formulating strategy, and because the world is centralized to such a degree, all the people below in the hierarchy did not have enough degrees of freedom to move.
Yeah.
That is what we need to undo. And all of this direction of travel in the direction of global accords for pandemic preparedness and these draconian amendments to the international health regulations need to be expunged, extirpated. They're an enormous threat to civilization and should not be seen in any other terms.
One of the criticisms that's leveled at ARC, and I think there may be some validity to it, is that this is a talk fest from relatively wealthy, powerful, well-connected people. If I may be so bold, you would be counted amongst that kind of a category of person. How could this possibly have any relevance, let alone any benefit, to the life of the ordinary person?
Look, there's to an extent, that is kind of fundamental to the way society works. You always have people of means and power and resources able to devote the time and spend the money getting together to talk.
Yeah.
And I think there's a certain vein of purism or purity testing that is infecting people a little bit, where they say, but they're all bad, they're the bad people.
Yeah.
It's not so. There's diversity of opinion in this room. For me, this kind of event is extraordinarily useful because it inspires creative thought.
Sure.
I establish connections with people who are potential allies, and I work out what's going on in the minds of people who I disagree with. And it's not necessary that every single person in a room needs to be addressing one and only one problem. That's not how the world works. So yes, of course, the observation has an element of truth, but to therefore discard the event and say that nothing good can come of it, I think that's wrong. It's difficult to chart a way out of a complex problem like the one we find ourselves in right now, a complex situation. And so I'm supportive of attempts to do so, warts and all. This is not an environment where people are suddenly going to be misled or taken down a false road, as I've seen people argue. No, this is an environment where connections can reconfigure and new ideas can be stimulated, and we're desperately in need of new ideas.
We're emerging from COVID, or in reality, most parts of the world have emerged from COVID. The policies, the lockdowns, etc., that we saw have been left behind now. But my observation would be there's a new level of interest, a new level of awakening. Are you observing that in your part of the world? Are people more engaged than before? And what do you see as sort of the next phase?
Yes, I very much do observe that. I would say that it remains the case that for the majority of people, they're experiencing such a degree of dissonance with respect to their own experience in the COVID phenomenon that it's still too painful to discuss. I refer to the glitch when people come up to me and say, well, Nick, what do you do? And I say, by day I do the private equity, by night I do the COVID. And there's that little moment, that flick, where it's like a little jolt that betrays that they know there was something wrong and they know that they didn't see it at the time, but they can't quite yet grapple with it or engage. And I think it tells you so much, because that's one of two types of response, right? Sure. I've never noticed a third. The other type of response is, oh man, yes, I'm actually familiar with your work, I totally agree with it, blah, 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 blah. What I never get is somebody saying, I know your work and you're completely wrong. That never happens, not once in 3 years. It's the glitch, in other words, the recognition that there's truth in what I say, or it's the agreement, the people who've already gone through the dissonance at some stage. And that, for me, is just fascinating. There's a tidal wave of people, a tidal wave of converts out there. And I think there's a lively awareness of something profound being about to happen.
I think you're absolutely right. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. I better let you get back inside before the next session starts. But Nicholas, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for having me on.